The pain in my hip seemed to intensify with each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner of our bedroom. 3 months since my stroke, and the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional devastation that had been building inside me for weeks. I hadn't been able to name it until today, until I saw them. My name is Vivian Steele. At 71, I've spent my life saving others as one of the first female cardiothoracic surgeons in Pittsburgh. I've held human hearts in my hands, literally bringing people back from the brink of death. But today, I couldn't even save myself from the betrayal happening under my own roof. Mrs. Steele, it's time for your medication. Natasha's voice carried that sickeningly sweet tone she'd perfected over the 3 months she'd been my physical therapist. Young, blonde, and with a body that had clearly caught my husband's wandering eye. I turned my head toward the doorway where she stood, pill cup in hand, her lipstick freshly applied, the same shade I'd seen smudged on Curtis's collar last week when he returned from a late night at the restaurant. "Put it on the nightstand, please," I said, keeping my voice even despite the fury simmering beneath. "I'll take it after I rest." She hesitated but placed the small paper cup down. "Dr. Steele said you should take these on schedule." Of course he did. Curtis, my husband of 50 years, had been micromanaging my medication ever since my stroke. I'd thought it was concern, but now I understood it was control. "I'm fine, Natasha. Thank you." I dismissed her with a slight wave of my hand, the one that still responded fully to my commands. The other rested in my lap, improving, but still not completely mine. After she left, I reached for the tablet I kept hidden between the mattress and box spring. Curtis thought I was technologically inept, another assumption about aging women that had worked to my advantage. It had taken only a few days after finding that lipstick to figure out his email password. Predictable man. Our anniversary date followed by his mother's maiden name. The emails between them were explicit, revolting in their intimacy. But it was the other correspondence that truly chilled me. Messages to our family lawyer about my diminished capacity. Discussions about having me declared mentally incompetent. Plans to transfer ownership of our restaurant empire, the one built with my inheritance and surgical earnings, solely to him before selling to an international conglomerate. 50 years of marriage, 2 children, 12 restaurants across 3 states, and he was planning to erase me from the equation entirely. I carefully replaced the tablet and took a deep, steadying breath. In the operating room, panic was the enemy. Clear thinking saved lives, and right now, I needed to save my own. That evening, Curtis came home smelling of his signature dish, coq au vin, and expensive cologne that I hadn't given him. "How's my girl today?" He leaned down to kiss my forehead, and it took everything in me not to recoil. "Better," I lied. I managed to walk to the window and back without the cane. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't push yourself, Viv. There's no rush." Of course there wasn't. The longer my recovery took, the more time he had to implement his plan. "Rebecca called," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "Our daughter, the financial wizard behind our restaurant empire's success." A flicker of something, concern, crossed his face. "What did she want?" "To check on me. She's coming for dinner tomorrow." Another lie. But I needed to see how deep this conspiracy went. Was my own daughter involved in her father's betrayal? "Tomorrow? I have meetings all day with the investors." His voice rose slightly. "You should have consulted me." I gave him my best helpless smile, the one I'd never used during my career, but had perfected these past weeks. "I'm sorry, dear. I forgot. Should I call and cancel?" Curtis paused, then shook his head. "No, it's fine. I'll make it work." He patted my knee paternalistically. "Maybe having Rebecca here will be good for you. Give you some company." That night, after Curtis fell asleep, I eased myself out of bed. My rehabilitation had been progressing better than anyone knew. I'd been practicing walking when alone, pushing through the pain, regaining strength. Not because I was particularly dedicated to recovery, but because I knew I would need my strength for what was coming. I made my way to Curtis's home office. The man was meticulous about his recipes, but careless with security. The desk drawer key was taped under his desk, exactly where it had been for decades. Inside, I found what I needed: the operating agreement for Steele Fine Dining, our company. I'd signed it years ago, barely glancing at the details because I trusted my husband. Foolish. I photographed every page with my tablet, then carefully replaced everything. The next morning, I called an old friend from my surgical days. Judith Pierce had left medicine to pursue law later in life, specializing in medical malpractice before retirement. More importantly, she owed me. I'd saved her husband's life when an aortic aneurysm nearly took him during what should have been a routine gallbladder surgery. Judith, it's Vivian Steele. Vivian, I heard about your stroke. How are you recovering? Well enough to know my husband is having an affair with my physical therapist and planning to have me declared incompetent. Silence stretched between us. Then, tell me everything. And I did. By the time Rebecca arrived for dinner, a dinner I'd actually arranged that morning, I had the beginnings of a plan. My daughter arrived looking every inch the financial executive she was. Tailored suit, perfectly styled chestnut hair, and the confident stride she'd inherited from me. Mom, she embraced me carefully, as though I might break. You look better than I expected. Appearances can be deceiving, I replied, watching her expression closely. We settled in the sunroom, the spring light illuminating the garden Curtis had once tended himself before becoming too important for such tasks. Your father tells me business is booming, I began casually. That international group is still interested? Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. He told you about Global Gastronomy's offer? Of course, I lied smoothly. Though perhaps not everything. Refresh my memory? My daughter hesitated, and in that pause, I saw my answer. She knew something, but perhaps not everything. They want to acquire us completely, she finally said. The offer is substantial, enough for you and Dad to retire very comfortably. And what role would you play if this sale went through? Another hesitation. They've offered me a position as regional finance director. It would mean relocating to Chicago. So that was part of Curtis's plan. Separate me from my daughter with a promotion she couldn't refuse. And Martin, has your father discussed this with your brother? Martin, my son, the one who had refused to join the family business, instead becoming a renowned food critic whose scathing reviews were both feared and respected throughout the culinary world. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. You know they barely speak. And Martin wouldn't care anyway. He's built his own career. I nodded thoughtfully. Rebecca, would you mind bringing me the small lockbox from my closet? The one on the top shelf? When she left, I quickly sent a text to Judith. Rebecca knows about the sale, but not the rest. Proceeding as discussed. Rebecca returned with the dusty lockbox. I hadn't opened it in years, but the combination was one I would never forget. The date of my first solo cardiac surgery. Inside was a document Curtis believed had been destroyed decades ago. A partnership agreement predating our marriage, when I had provided the initial capital for his first restaurant. A document granting me 51% ownership of any culinary venture bearing the Steele name. What's that? Rebecca asked, her interest piqued as a financial officer. Insurance, I replied, sliding it back into the box. For a rainy day. That evening, after Rebecca left and Curtis returned home, I played my role perfectly. The recovering patient, slightly confused but trusting. I asked about his day, listened to his lies about meetings with suppliers when I knew he'd been with Natasha, and pretended not to notice when he slipped something extra into my evening tea. I didn't drink it, of course. I'd stopped consuming anything he prepared weeks ago after finding disturbing searches on his tablet about medications that could mimic dementia symptoms. The next morning, I made my move. While Curtis was in the shower, I took his phone and sent a text to Natasha canceling her visit for the day. A family emergency requiring her attention elsewhere. Then I called a car service using the app my grandchildren had installed on my phone so Grandma can get around. The destination, Raymond Chen's office. Raymond had been our accountant for decades before Curtis replaced him with a younger, more innovative firm 3 years ago. Curtis had never known that Raymond and I still met for lunch twice a year, maintaining a friendship that had begun when we were both ambitious immigrants' children, determined to succeed in our chosen fields. Vivian! Raymond stood as I was escorted into his modest office. This is a surprise. A necessary one, I'm afraid. I lowered myself carefully into the chair across from him. I need your expertise, Raymond, and your discretion. By the time I left Raymond's office 3 hours later, I had confirmation of what I'd suspected. Curtis had been systematically moving assets out of our joint holdings for years, preparing for this moment. But he'd made crucial mistakes: signatures forged, transactions improperly documented, taxes improperly filed, ammunition I could use. I had the car take me directly to Martin's downtown apartment. We hadn't spoken in months, not since he'd published a scathing review of our flagship restaurant, criticizing the complacent cuisine resting on faded laurels. Curtis had been furious, but I had secretly agreed with every word. The innovation that had once defined Steel fine dining had disappeared years ago. Martin opened the door, surprise evident on his face, a face so like mine that it sometimes startled me. "Mom, what are you doing here? Should you be out alone?" "I'm perfectly capable of visiting my son," I said, moving past him into his apartment. It was minimalist and immaculate, with a wall of cookbooks and a kitchen that would make professional chefs envious. "We need to talk." "About Dad's review?" He sighed. "I stand by what I wrote. This isn't about your review. It's about your father's plan to sell the restaurants, cut me out of the proceeds, and have me declared mentally incompetent." Martin stared at me, speechless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "Sit down," I said. "This will take a while." I told him everything: the affair, the plans I'd discovered, the consultation with Judith, the financial irregularities Raymond had identified. With each revelation, Martin's expression darkened. "That son of a bitch," he finally said. "I always knew he was arrogant, but this— I need your help, Martin. Your connections in the industry, your platform as a critic. What exactly are you planning to do, Mom?" I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had in months. "I'm going to sell your father's beloved restaurants before he can, and keep every dollar. The prenup doesn't cover businesses established with my capital. Your father thinks that original agreement was lost. It wasn't." Martin leaned back, studying me with new eyes. "You know, all those years watching Dad take credit for your contributions, I wondered why you never stood up for yourself. I had my career. The restaurants were his domain. And now I have nothing to lose." I reached for his hand. "Will you help me?" Martin squeezed my fingers. "Tell me what you need." As the spring afternoon faded into evening, we formulated the next phase of my plan. Martin would reach out to Diana Corey, the executive from Global Gastronomy who'd been courting Curtis. I would contact our family lawyer, not to discuss my condition, as Curtis planned, but to review the original partnership documents. By the time I returned home, darkness had fallen. Curtis was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "She's not answering. I don't know where—" He stopped abruptly when he saw me. "Never mind. She just walked in." He ended the call without saying goodbye. "Where the hell have you been, Vivian? I've been worried sick." The concern in his voice sounded genuine. He'd always been an excellent performer. It was part of his charm as the public face of our restaurants. "I went to see Martin," I said simply, lowering myself into a chair. "It's been too long since we talked." Curtis's face tightened. "You should have told me. You're not supposed to go out alone yet." "According to whom?" "My doctor cleared me for normal activities weeks ago." "You know how forgetful you've been. What if you'd gotten lost or fallen?" I smiled placidly. "But I didn't. And Martin and I had a lovely visit. He sends his regards." Curtis turned away, busying himself with dinner preparations. "Next time, tell me. Or have Natasha accompany you." Speaking of Natasha, she texted to check on that family emergency. "Is everything all right?" His hands stilled momentarily. "Just a misunderstanding." He changed the subject quickly. "Rebecca mentioned she visited. Did you have a good talk?" "Wonderful," I replied. "She told me all about Global Gastronomy's offer." The knife he was using paused mid-chop. "Did she?" Sounds like an excellent opportunity. When were you planning to discuss it with me?" Curtis turned, his expression carefully composed. "I was waiting for the right time. You've been focused on recovery, and I didn't want to burden you with business matters." "How considerate." I kept my voice neutral. "When is the next meeting with them?" He studied me for a moment. "Next week. Why?" "I'd like to attend." "Vivian, that's not necessary. Rebecca and I have it under control. Nevertheless, as co-owner, I should be present." Curtis placed the knife down carefully. "Co-owner? Vivian, you're a shareholder." "Yes, but the operational decisions were established in our original agreement, the one in my lockbox." His face paled slightly. "That old thing? It was superseded decades ago when we incorporated." Actually, no. The terms were quite specific about any business bearing the Steele name. I rose slowly from my chair. But we can discuss this with the lawyers if you prefer. For a moment, I saw a flash of the real Curtis, calculating, cold. Then his mask slipped back into place. You're confused, Viv. This is exactly why I've been concerned about your cognitive state since the stroke. Nung, am I confused about Natasha too? About the emails you've been sending to Dr. Winters about having me evaluated for diminished capacity? This time, the mask slipped completely. You've been going through my private correspondence? And you've been sleeping with my physical therapist while plotting to steal my company. Curtis stepped toward me, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Be very careful, Vivian. You've had a medical event. You're not thinking clearly. If you pursue this, I'll have no choice but to accelerate the competency evaluation. I smiled then, feeling a surge of the confidence that had once carried me through 12-hour surgeries. Go ahead, my neurologist, my real doctor, not whatever quack you've been consulting behind my back, has already provided a complete evaluation showing my cognitive functions are unimpaired. Judith Pierce has it on file. Judith? What does your old friend have to do with this? She's representing me now. I suggest you have your lawyer contact her regarding any further discussions about Steele fine dining. I left him standing in the kitchen, speechless with rage. In our bedroom, I locked the door and called Judith. It's done, I told her. He knows I know. Are you safe there tonight, Vivian? I thought about the man downstairs, the stranger I'd been married to for 50 years. Yes, he won't risk anything that could appear suspicious now that he knows I'm represented. The documents are in order. We can file first thing tomorrow. And Diana Corey? Martin's meeting with her as we speak. I ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of decades of silence and accommodation lifting from my shoulders. Tomorrow would bring a storm, legal maneuvers, family confrontations, perhaps even public scandal. But for the first time since my stroke, perhaps for the first time in years, I felt fully alive. The woman who had trusted too easily was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. The morning light filtered through the curtains as I opened my eyes, momentarily disoriented. For a brief second, I existed in the liminal space between my old life and new reality, before the weight of yesterday's confrontation with Curtis settled back on my shoulders. I listened for sounds in the house. Nothing. Glancing at the clock, 6:47 a.m., I realized Curtis had already left. Unusual for him to depart so early, but predictable under the circumstances. He was running, gathering his forces. My phone buzzed with a text from Judith. Meeting set with Diana Corey, 10 a.m. Martin will pick you up at 9:15. I eased myself out of bed, my body stiff but serviceable. In the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection. Silver hair neatly cut in the practical style I'd worn for decades, lines mapping a life of concentration and precision around my eyes. Curtis had recently suggested I consider refreshing my appearance. New chapter of life, new look, he'd said, with that patronizing smile. Now I understood why he suddenly cared about my appearance after years of benign neglect. By 7:30, I was dressed in one of my surgical conference suits, navy blue, impeccably tailored, with a silk scarf in crimson. Battle armor. I'd just finished applying lipstick when the doorbell rang. Through the security panel, I saw Natasha on the porch, looking confused and slightly annoyed. I pressed the intercom button. Yes? Mrs. Steele, I'm here for your morning session. Her voice carried that artificial cheerfulness that had grated on me for months. I've canceled our sessions moving forward, Ms. Lambert. Your services are no longer required. A pause. But Dr. Steele specifically asked me to. My husband doesn't make my medical decisions. That will be all. I watched her face shift from surprise to calculation. Mrs. Steele, I really think you should reconsider. In your condition. My condition is none of your concern. Please leave before I contact the licensing board about your unprofessional conduct. Her expression hardened. Curtis said you might be difficult. Did he mention I recorded several of your encounters in this house while I was supposedly resting? Quite unprofessional for a physical therapist. That wasn't true, but she couldn't know that. The uncertainty that flashed across her face was worth the bluff. This isn't over, she said finally, turning to leave. On that point, We agree. I called a locksmith immediately afterward, explaining that I needed the locks changed due to missing keys. By 9 AM, the house was secured with new keys and a security code that Curtis didn't have. Martin arrived precisely at 9:15, his black Audi pulling into the driveway with the same precision he applied to everything in his life. "You look formidable," he said, as I settled into the passenger seat. "That's the idea." As Martin navigated through Pittsburgh's morning traffic, I reviewed the documents Judith had emailed. The original partnership agreement, my full medical clearance, and a detailed timeline of Curtis's financial maneuvers that Raymond had prepared. "Did you speak with Diana Corey?" I asked. Martin nodded, his eyes on the road. She was intrigued, especially when I mentioned the potential PR nightmare of buying a company from a man who was trying to defraud his stroke survivor wife. "And? She wants to hear directly from you. Hence this morning's meeting." We arrived at Judith's downtown office with 10 minutes to spare. Her assistant showed us to a conference room where Judith waited, elegant as always in a charcoal suit, her silver hair styled in a sleek bob. "Vivian," she embraced me warmly before pulling back to assess me. "You look ready for battle. I've been preparing for this moment longer than I realized." Diana Corey arrived exactly at 10, a striking woman in her early 50s with an air of contained energy. Her handshake was firm, her assessment of me swift and thorough. "Mrs. Steele, I admit this meeting comes as a surprise. Your husband gave me the impression you were indisposed. I'm sure he did. Just as I'm sure he neglected to mention several key facts about the ownership of Steele Fine Dining." For the next hour, I laid out the situation methodically, as I would have presented a complex case to surgical residents. The original capital investment, the legal agreement, Curtis's systematic efforts to marginalize my role over decades, the recent plot to have me declared incompetent. Diana listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a sleek tablet. When I finished, she was silent for several moments. "These are serious allegations," she said finally. "They're not allegations, they're documented facts." I nodded to Judith, who slid a folder across the table. Diana examined the contents carefully. "This original agreement appears to give you controlling interest, 51%, which Curtis believed was lost decades ago. And your daughter, Rebecca? What's her position in this?" "She knows about your acquisition offer, but not about her father's plans regarding me. I believe he's kept her deliberately in the dark about certain aspects while dangling the position in Chicago as incentive." Diana closed the folder. "Global gastronomy has a strict ethics code. We won't be party to any transaction with complications. There won't be complications if you deal with me instead of Curtis." Her eyebrow arched. "You're proposing to sell me the company?" "I'm proposing to sell you a company with clean books, clear ownership, and without the PR disaster of defrauding an elderly stroke survivor." Martin leaned forward slightly. "My mother is also offering something my father can't: authenticity. The original recipes that made Steele Fine Dining famous were hers. The signature dishes that put us on the culinary map came from her family's traditions, adapted by her, then claimed by him. This wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Curtis had always borrowed liberally from my Italian grandmother's recipes, refining them with French techniques he'd learned in culinary school. Diana studied me with new interest. "And you'd be willing to include these original recipes as part of the acquisition?" "With proper attribution, yes. I'll need to discuss this with my team." She gathered her things. "But I'm interested in continuing this conversation." After she left, Judith turned to me. "That went better than expected." "We're not done yet." I checked my watch. "Curtis will have heard from Natasha by now. Rebecca too, most likely." As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. "Mother, what the hell is going on? Dad just called me, completely frantic, saying you've lost your mind." "I'm perfectly sane, Rebecca. Unlike your father, who's been sleeping with my physical therapist and planning to have me declared incompetent." Silence. Then, that can't be true. Check your email. I've sent you everything. The emails, the consultation with that hack psychiatrist, the financial transfers." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back." She wouldn't call back immediately, I knew. She'd verify. Rebecca never took anything at face value. a quality that made her an excellent CFO but sometimes a difficult daughter. Martin drove me home, both of us quiet, processing the morning's events. As we pulled into the driveway, he tensed. "Dad's here." Curtis's Mercedes was parked haphazardly near the garage, a sign of his agitation. In 50 years, I'd never seen him park carelessly. "You don't have to go in," Martin said. "Come stay with me until this blows over." "This isn't going to blow over, Martin. And I'm not leaving my home." Inside, Curtis was waiting in the living room, his normally impeccable appearance disheveled. He rose when we entered, his expression shifting from anger to calculation when he saw Martin. "So you've dragged our son into this delusion of yours," he said. Martin stepped slightly in front of me. "The only delusion was thinking you could get away with it." Curtis ignored him, focusing on me. "Vivian, this has gone far enough. You're unwell. You need help." "The locks have been changed," I said calmly. "I'd like you to leave. This is my house. It's our house, paid for with surgical earnings that were primarily mine. Now, you can leave voluntarily, or Martin can call the police and show them the evidence of financial exploitation of an elderly person. Your choice." Curtis's face reddened. "You ungrateful. After everything I've done for you." "Save it," Martin snapped. "We've seen the emails. We know exactly what you've done and what you were planning to do." For a moment, I thought Curtis might lunge at Martin. Instead, he straightened, his mask of control slipping back into place. "This isn't over, Vivian. Not by a long shot." He grabbed his coat. "When you come to your senses, call me." After he left, I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the morning was fading. "You okay?" Martin asked, concern etched on his face. "Just tired. It's been a long time since I performed in high-stakes situations. You were magnificent." He sat beside me. "But this is just the beginning. Dad won't give up easily. I'm counting on it." I patted his hand. "Your father's greatest weakness has always been his pride. He'll make mistakes." That evening, alone in the house that had never felt entirely mine despite 5 decades of residence, I reviewed the next steps of my plan. Raymond was discreetly gathering documentation of all the financial irregularities in the restaurant operations. Judith was preparing injunctions to prevent Curtis from accessing business accounts. Martin was reaching out to contacts in the culinary world, controlling the narrative before Curtis could spin his own version. The only wild card was Rebecca. She finally called just after 9, her voice tight. "I've reviewed everything you sent. And I don't know what to think. These emails, they're damning. But Dad says they're taken out of context. What context would justify conspiring with a doctor to have me declared incompetent?" She was silent for a moment. "He says he was worried about you, that your behavior has been erratic since the stroke. Has it seemed erratic to you?" "No," she admitted, "but I don't see you every day." "Rebecca, think about it. Have I ever, in your entire life, shown signs of mental instability? Even after the stroke, even during recovery, have I ever seemed anything other than myself?" More silence. Then, quietly, "No, you've always been the steady one. Your father offered you Chicago to keep you from looking too closely at what he was doing." "That's not fair. I earned that position." "Of course you did. But the timing wasn't coincidental." I could almost hear her thinking, reassessing conversations and meetings from the past months. "What are you planning to do?" she finally asked. "Sell the company before he can. Honor the deal with Global Gastronomy, but on my terms. Those restaurants are his life's work." "They're our life's work," I corrected. "Built with my money, my family's recipes, and supported by my career. While he took the glory, I took night calls and performed emergency surgeries. If you do this, there's no going back. He'll never forgive you. I don't want his forgiveness, Rebecca. I want justice." After we hung up, I wasn't sure where she stood. Rebecca had always been closer to Curtis, sharing his ambition and business instincts. But she was also pragmatic to her core. She would align with whoever offered the clearest path forward. The next morning brought a flurry of legal maneuvers. Curtis's lawyer, a slick corporate attorney half my age, filed an emergency petition questioning my competency. Judith countered with my neurologist's comprehensive evaluation and a motion for financial discovery. By noon, we had a temporary restraining order preventing Curtis from accessing the business accounts or entering any Steel fine dining property. Diana Corey called just after lunch. Mrs. Steele, I've discussed your situation with my board. We're prepared to proceed with the acquisition, dealing exclusively with you, pending verification of your ownership claims, of course. Of course. However, we'd like to revise our offer. Given the unusual circumstances, I had anticipated this. You're proposing a discount due to the potential complications. We're taking on significant risk. You're getting a bargain, Ms. Corey. The price remains as originally negotiated with my husband, or I'll find another buyer. Believe me, once the story of a prominent restaurateur attempting to defraud his stroke survivor wife becomes public, I'll have options. A pause. You're not what I expected, Mrs. Steele. I've heard that my entire career. By the end of the call, she had agreed to the original terms with one addition. I would serve as a consultant for 6 months, helping transition my grandmother's recipes and training their chefs in the authentic techniques. As I ended the call, the doorbell rang. Through the security panel, I saw Rebecca, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I opened the door, and for a moment we simply looked at each other, mother and daughter, so different in our approaches to life, yet linked by something deeper than circumstance. I spoke with Martin, she said, and Dad, and his lawyer. I waited. I saw the psychiatric consultation Dad arranged, the one claiming cognitive decline based on symptoms I've never observed. She took a deep breath. I've withdrawn from the Chicago position. Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. Come in. In the kitchen, as I prepared tea, a ritual that had steadied my hands through decades of surgical pressure, Rebecca studied me with new eyes. Why didn't you ever tell me? About the original investment, about your role in the recipes. I placed a cup before her. It seemed unimportant compared to building a career where women were barely tolerated. The restaurants were your father's domain. While you saved lives. While I saved lives, I agreed. And now? Now I'm saving myself. Rebecca nodded slowly. Global Gastronomy called me this morning, asking about financial documentation. And? I told them I'd provide everything they needed. To you, not to Dad. She wrapped her hands around the teacup. He's furious, says I've betrayed him. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. What happens next? She asked. We complete the sale. You decide whether to accept a position with Global Gastronomy or move on. And I paused, considering the future that had seemed so prescribed just weeks ago. I reclaim what's left of my life. That afternoon, I met with Raymond to review the complete financial history of Steele Fine Dining. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not surprising. Years of Curtis gradually shifting assets, giving himself excessive compensation while minimizing mine, creative accounting that bordered on fraud. He's been planning this for a long time, Raymond said, his expression grim. Not this specifically, but creating distance between me and the finances? Yes. That's been ongoing since the beginning. The next blow came from an unexpected quarter. As Raymond was leaving, I received a call from our family physician, the man who had delivered both my children and treated my family for 4 decades. Vivian, I'm disturbed by what I'm hearing. Curtis came to see me, extremely concerned about your mental state. Did he mention he's having an affair with my physical therapist and trying to take control of our business? A pause. He mentioned delusions. Robert, you've known me for 40 years. Have I ever struck you as delusional? No, but stroke can... I've been evaluated by Dr. Patel at Presbyterian. I'll have her send you the results directly. After ending the call, I sat in the sudden silence of the house, feeling the weight of Curtis's machinations. He was activating every connection, attempting to build a case against me. The respected surgeon, the co-founder of the business, reduced to a confused old woman imagining conspiracies. I wouldn't let it happen. That evening, Martin returned with takeout and news from his industry contacts. The rumor mill is churning. Dad's been calling in favors, trying to get ahead of whatever story breaks. And? Most people are reserving judgment. Your reputation in this city is pretty unassailable, Mom. 30 years of saving lives buys a lot of goodwill. I picked at my food, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. The stress of the past days, combined with my still recovering body, was taking its toll. Martin noticed. You need to rest. Tomorrow's the meeting with Global Gastronomy's legal team. I know. I just keep waiting for Curtis's next move. Whatever it is, We'll handle it. After Martin left, I secured the house and prepared for bed, my mind still racing with contingencies and countermoves. As I finally drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You have no idea what you're up against. Curtis Steele made you. He can unmake you just as easily. Natasha. I blocked the number without responding. Let them threaten. Let them scheme. Tomorrow, I would begin dismantling the empire Curtis had built on my foundation. And when I was finished, he would understand what it meant to lose everything you believed was yours. Sleep came in restless fragments that night, my mind cycling through strategies and countermoves like the methodical checklist I once used before complex surgeries. By dawn, I was already awake, reviewing documents at the kitchen table when my phone rang. Judith's name flashed on the screen. "Turn on the news," she said without preamble. I fumbled for the remote, switching to the local morning show. And there he was, Curtis, looking distinguished and concerned in his chef's whites, sitting across from a sympathetic interviewer. "Worried about my wife's health," he was saying, his expression a perfect mask of spousal concern. The stroke affected her more than we initially realized. Paranoia, confusion. Her doctors say these can be unfortunate consequences of the type of cerebral event she experienced. The interviewer nodded solemnly. "And now she's making these accusations? It breaks my heart," Curtis continued, his voice catching slightly. 50 years together, building our restaurants from nothing. And now, he shook his head sadly. "I just want to get her the help she needs." I muted the television, my hand perfectly steady despite the rage coursing through me. "He's playing the devoted husband card." "As expected," Judith replied. "But we're prepared. Dr. Patel is willing to go on record about your cognitive status, and I've already called the station demanding equal time for your perspective. They won't give it. Curtis has been cultivating those relationships for decades. Free meals, personal appearances, charitable donations. Then we go digital. Martin's connections in food media will be crucial now." I ended the call and immediately phoned Martin, who had already seen the interview. "That manipulative bastard," he fumed. "Using Mom's health like this?" "Focus, Martin. We need to counter this narrative immediately. Your industry contacts, your social media platforms, use them." Within an hour, Martin had mobilized his considerable following. As a respected critic, his words carried weight, and his defense of me, complete with pointed questions about why a devoted husband would be consulting psychiatric specialists without his wife's knowledge, spread quickly through culinary circles. Rebecca called next, her voice tight with anger. "I've just seen Dad's interview. He never mentioned he was doing this. Are you surprised?" She hesitated. "No, not anymore." After a pause, she added, "The Global Gastronomy legal team wants to postpone today's meeting in light of these developments." Cold dread settled in my stomach. Curtis is creating exactly the doubt he needs. "I've scheduled a video call with them in 30 minutes. I think you should join." The call was tense from the outset. Diana Khoury's face revealed nothing as she introduced her legal team. 3 serious-looking individuals whose expressions suggested they were regretting their involvement. "Mrs. Steele," Diana began, "I'm sure you understand our concern. Your husband's public statements raise questions about the viability of this transaction." "They raise no legitimate questions," I replied calmly. "They represent a desperate attempt by a man who has been caught in financial impropriety and personal betrayal." The lead attorney, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "With respect, Mrs. Steele, we need absolute certainty about your capacity to enter into this agreement. You have my neurologist's comprehensive evaluation. You have financial records demonstrating my husband's systematic efforts to divert assets. What you're witnessing is not my incapacity, but his desperation." Rebecca unexpectedly spoke up. "As CFO of Steele Fine Dining, I can confirm that all financial documentation provided to Global Gastronomy is accurate. I can also attest to my mother's complete lucidity and capacity." Diana studied both of us. "Curtis Steele has been the public face of these restaurants for decades. His allegations create significant PR complications." "Only if you believe them," I countered. "Consider the narrative from another angle. Beloved local surgeon, after suffering a stroke, discovers her husband's betrayal and fights back against his attempt to steal her legacy. That's a story people will rally behind. The call ended with nothing resolved, but I could see uncertainty in Diana's eyes. She hadn't walked away. Not yet. After the call, Rebecca remained on the line. Mom, we need to address this head on. Dad's controlling the story right now. What do you suggest? A counter-interview. You have friends at Presbyterian Hospital, doctors who've known you for decades. We get them on record about your mental acuity. Then we present the evidence of Dad's plans. That turns this into a public spectacle. It already is. The difference is whether we let Dad define the terms. She was right, of course. Rebecca had always understood the power of perception in business. While I had focused on competence, believing excellence would speak for itself, she knew that narrative often trumped reality. Set it up, I said finally. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Judith arrived with a medical defamation specialist. Martin brought a media consultant who had helped several of his chef friends navigate public relations crises. Together, we crafted a response strategy that would expose Curtis's manipulation without seeming vindictive or unstable. Just before noon, as we finalized our approach, the doorbell rang. Through the security panel, I saw a courier holding a thick envelope. "Vivian Steele?" he asked when I opened the door. "Yes, you've been served." He handed me the envelope and departed quickly. Inside was a petition for emergency guardianship filed by Curtis, claiming I was a danger to myself due to cognitive decline and paranoid delusions. He was seeking immediate temporary guardianship and control of all personal and business assets. Judith reviewed the documents, her expression grave. "He's moving faster than anticipated. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning." "Can he actually get guardianship?" Martin asked, the alarm evident in his voice. "Not with Dr. Patel's evaluation on record," Judith replied. "But he could delay the sale to Global Gastronomy, which I suspect is his primary goal right now." "We need to respond to this publicly," Rebecca insisted. "Now." Within an hour, I was seated in the office of Dr. Catherine Patel, my neurologist, with a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and another from a popular medical podcast. Dr. Patel, a woman I had mentored 2 decades earlier when she was a medical student, spoke with the clear authority of her position. "I have conducted extensive cognitive testing on Dr. Steele following her stroke. Her executive function, memory, and reasoning abilities are all within normal parameters for her age and education level. There is absolutely no medical basis for questioning her capacity to make personal or financial decisions." The reporters turned to me. "Dr. Steele, your husband claims you've been experiencing paranoia and confusion. How do you respond?" I met their gaze steadily. "I discovered evidence that my husband was having an affair with my physical therapist and planning to have me declared incompetent. He calls this paranoia. I call it unpleasant fact. You're a renowned surgeon who saved countless lives in this city. Why would your husband make these claims if they weren't true? Because Steele Fine Dining was built with my family money and recipes. Because I own 51% of the company according to our original partnership agreement. Because Curtis has spent decades taking credit for my contributions while systematically reducing my role." I paused. "And because he doesn't believe a 71-year-old woman who's had a stroke will fight back." By late afternoon, the interviews were online and generating significant local attention. Former patients began calling the news stations with stories of my precision and care as a surgeon. Colleagues from Presbyterian released a joint statement supporting my professional reputation and mental acuity. The tide was turning, but Curtis wasn't finished. As evening approached, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You think you're so clever, Vivian." Natasha's voice was cold. "But you have no idea what Curtis is capable of. I've been married to him for 50 years. I know exactly what he's capable of. Do you?" She laughed softly. "You didn't know he was sleeping with me for months. You didn't know he's been documenting your episodes since the stroke. The confusion, the memory lapses." My blood ran cold. "What episodes?" "The ones we created. Medication mix-ups, conversations you don't remember because they never happened. It's all documented with my professional observations as your therapist." The realization dawned slowly, horribly. "You've been gaslighting me." Such an ugly term. "We've been establishing a pattern of cognitive decline. one that the court will find very compelling. I ended the call, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with fury. They had been systematically undermining me, creating a false record while I trusted them with my recovery. I immediately called Judith and explained what Natasha had revealed. "This complicates things," she admitted. "Her professional observations will carry weight. She fabricated them, which we'll need to prove." Judith paused. "We need to discredit her testimony before the hearing." "How?" "Leave that to me." The next morning dawned gray and cold, a spring rain lashing against the windows as I dressed for court. I chose a conservative suit, pearl earrings that had been my mother's, and took extra care with my appearance. Perception mattered today more than ever. Martin arrived to drive me downtown, his expression grim. "Rebecca's meeting us at the courthouse. She's bringing the original financial documents." "And Judith?" "Already there with Dr. Patel." The courthouse was imposing, its stone facade a reminder of the weight of institutional power. Inside, in a wood-paneled courtroom, Curtis waited with his lawyer and Natasha. He looked impeccable, as always, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. Natasha sat beside him, professional in a conservative suit, her hand occasionally touching his arm in a gesture of support that made my stomach turn. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the mask slipped. I saw the cold calculation beneath, the fury that I had dared to challenge him. Then the concerned husband persona slid back into place as the judge entered. Judge Eleanor Morales was in her 60s, her salt and pepper hair cut in a practical bob, her dark eyes sharp as she surveyed the courtroom. I knew her reputation, fair but no nonsense, with little patience for theatrics. Curtis's lawyer presented first, outlining my supposed decline with practiced sympathy. "Dr. Steele has had a distinguished career, Your Honor, which makes her current condition all the more tragic. Since her stroke, she has exhibited paranoid ideation, confusion, and impaired judgment." Natasha took the stand next, describing with clinical precision the episodes she had supposedly witnessed. Moments of confusion that had never occurred, angry outbursts that were entirely fabricated. "And in your professional opinion," Curtis's lawyer prompted, "is Dr. Steele currently capable of managing her personal and financial affairs?" "No," Natasha replied firmly. "Her cognitive impairment poses a serious risk to her well-being." When it was our turn, Judith approached the bench with calm confidence. "Your Honor, what we're witnessing today is not a case of cognitive decline, but a calculated attempt by Curtis Steele to gain control of assets that rightfully belong to my client." Dr. Patel presented her findings next, methodically dismantling Natasha's claims with medical evidence. "The type of stroke Dr. Steele experienced typically does not cause the symptoms Ms. Lambert describes. Furthermore, my extensive testing shows no cognitive impairment." As she stepped down, Judith called her next witness, a surprise even to me. "The court calls Raymond Chen." Raymond approached the stand, impeccable in his charcoal suit, his expression grave. "Mr. Chen, what was your relationship with Steele Fine Dining?" "I was their accountant for 27 years until Curtis Steele replaced me 3 years ago." "And during that time, did you observe any financial irregularities?" Raymond adjusted his glasses. "Over the past decade, Curtis Steele systematically transferred assets from joint accounts to private holdings, reduced Dr. Steele's ownership percentage through questionable stock reallocations, and created a separate corporate entity that receives substantial consulting fees from Steele Fine Dining." The courtroom was silent as Raymond detailed years of financial manipulation, his testimony reinforced by meticulous documentation. "And when did these maneuvers accelerate?" Judith asked. "Immediately following Dr. Steele's stroke. The transfers increased in both frequency and amount." Curtis leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer, his mask of concern replaced by barely contained rage. Rebecca testified next, confirming Raymond's assertions and adding her own findings as CFO. "I was kept deliberately uninformed about certain financial structures," she explained, her voice steady, despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "When I began investigating discrepancies, my father offered me a position with Global Gastronomy that would require relocation to Chicago." "A bribe, in effect," Judith suggested. "I believe so, yes." Throughout the testimony, I watched Judge Morales. Her expression remained impassive, but I saw her taking detailed notes, her gaze occasionally shifting to Curtis with something like skepticism. The final blow came when Judith called her surprise witness. The court calls Jason Winters. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit approached the stand. With a start, I recognized the psychiatrist Curtis had consulted about my supposed condition. Dr. Winters, did Curtis Steele contact you regarding his wife's mental capacity? Yes, about 2 months ago. And did you evaluate Dr. Steele personally? He shifted uncomfortably. No. Mr. Steele provided me with observations and reports, primarily from Ms. Lambert. Based on those, I prepared a preliminary assessment. Without ever meeting or examining Dr. Steele? That's correct, Mr. Steele said she was resistant to evaluation, so we discussed strategies to document her behavior for potential guardianship proceedings. So you helped craft a case against Dr. Steele based solely on her husband's claims? Dr. Winters looked distinctly uncomfortable now. In retrospect, it was not my finest professional moment. By the time closing arguments concluded, the shift in the courtroom was palpable. Judge Morales studied both parties before delivering her ruling. I find no evidence supporting the need for emergency guardianship. On the contrary, the evidence suggests this petition was filed in bad faith as part of a broader attempt to gain control of assets rightfully belonging to Dr. Steele. She fixed Curtis with a stern gaze. The petition is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing Mr. Steele from accessing any Steele fine dining accounts or properties pending full financial investigation. Outside the courtroom in the marble hallway, Curtis approached me, his lawyer attempting unsuccessfully to hold him back. You think you've won? His voice was low, controlled, but vibrating with rage. This company is my life's work. I built it from nothing. You were just the checkbook. I met his gaze steadily. No, Curtis. I was the foundation you built upon, the support you leaned on, the safety net that allowed you to take risks. And now I'm the reckoning you never saw coming. Rebecca stepped between us. Dad, don't make this worse than it already is. Curtis looked at her with undisguised betrayal. You chose her side. I chose the truth. He turned and walked away, Natasha hurrying after him, their body language speaking volumes. This battle was won, but the war was far from over. Back at home, exhausted but vindicated, I received a call from Diana Khoury. Dr. Steele, I followed the court proceedings with interest. And Global Gastronomy remains committed to acquiring Steele Fine Dining, with you as the primary negotiator. Our legal team is satisfied with your capacity to enter into this agreement. Relief washed over me. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is a business decision. Your husband has created a PR nightmare, but you've emerged as a sympathetic figure. The narrative of the accomplished woman reclaiming her legacy is one we're happy to align ourselves with. After the call ended, I sat in my garden, watching the spring rain taper off, leaving everything fresh and renewed. Martin brought tea, settling into the chair beside me. You did it, Mom. Part of it, I corrected. Curtis won't give up. He'll find another angle. Let him try. The truth is on record now. I sipped my tea, considering the path forward. The Global Gastronomy deal is back on. We'll need to move quickly before Curtis can regroup. What about afterward? Have you thought about what comes next for you? I hadn't, not really. For so long, my identity had been defined by my roles: surgeon, wife, mother, silent partner. Now, at 71, I was being forced to reimagine myself. One battle at a time, I said finally. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I noticed a text from Rebecca. Dad's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. Says he has evidence that will change everything. I stared at the message, a chill running through me despite my courtroom victory. Curtis had access to decades of our shared history. What card did he still have to play? The answer came at midnight, when my email chimed with a message from Curtis himself. The subject line read simply, "You should have left well enough alone." I opened it to find a single attachment, a scanned document from 30 years ago, a malpractice settlement I had nearly forgotten. The case that had almost ended my career, the one mistake that still haunted my dreams. A surgery where I had made a judgment call that resulted in a patient's death. The hospital had settled quietly, the records sealed by court order. How Curtis had obtained this document, I couldn't imagine. But its message was clear. If I proceeded with selling his beloved restaurants, he would destroy the reputation I had spent a lifetime building. I closed the email, my hands perfectly steady despite the storm raging within. So this was his final play, mutually assured destruction. If he couldn't have the restaurants, he would make sure I lost something equally precious, my professional legacy. What Curtis failed to understand was that 50 years of being underestimated, overlooked, and marginalized had prepared me for this moment. I had survived in a field that had never wanted me. I had excelled despite barriers at every turn. I had saved countless lives with the same hands that had failed that one patient. I picked up my phone and texted Rebecca, "Tell your father I'll see him at the board meeting." Then I called Judith. We had work to do before morning. Sleep eluded me that night as I formulated my response to Curtis's threat. By dawn, I was already dressed and reviewing the old malpractice case with clinical detachment. The facts hadn't changed in 30 years. A high-risk surgery, a split-second decision, a tragic outcome. What had changed was me. The boardroom of Steel Fine Dining occupied the top floor of our flagship restaurant downtown. I hadn't visited in years. Another way Curtis had gradually edged me out of the business I'd helped create. As I entered, leaning only slightly on my cane, the conversation halted abruptly. Curtis sat at the head of the table, a position he'd claimed so long ago that no one questioned it anymore. The other board members, mostly Curtis's golf partners and culinary world connections, regarded me with mixtures of surprise, discomfort, and curiosity. Rebecca and Martin flanked me as I took a seat directly opposite Curtis. "Vivian," Curtis nodded stiffly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I believe there was some evidence you wanted to present?" My voice was steady, my gaze unwavering. Curtis signaled to his assistant, who distributed folders to each board member. "Before we begin, I want to emphasize that this is not how I wanted things to proceed. I've tried to protect Vivian's reputation, but her recent actions have forced my hand." The board members opened their folders, and I watched their expressions shift as they reviewed the malpractice documents. Curtis had been thorough. The settlement agreement, the original complaint, even confidential hospital review notes that should have been impossible to obtain. 30 years ago, Curtis continued, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of a man accustomed to holding court. "My wife made a critical error during surgery that resulted in a patient's death. The hospital settled quietly to avoid scandal, and the records were sealed." The room remained silent as he turned to me. "Vivian, your recent accusations about my financial improprieties and personal conduct have painted me as a villain. But I've only ever acted to protect this company, and you. If these documents were to become public, your legacy as a surgeon would be irreparably damaged." It was a masterful performance. Curtis had always excelled at presenting himself as reasonable, even when delivering a threat. "Are you blackmailing Dr. Steele?" Martin's voice cut through the tension, his disgust evident. Curtis spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm simply pointing out the consequences of pursuing this destructive course of action. The global gastronomy deal cannot proceed without board approval, which I strongly advise against giving." I looked around the table at the men who had rubber-stamped Curtis's decisions for decades. Their discomfort was evident, but so was their loyalty to him. "May I speak?" I asked, though it wasn't really a question. Curtis nodded magnanimously, confident in his position. I took a deep breath, centering myself as I had before countless surgeries. 30 years ago, I performed a high-risk procedure on a 42-year-old mother of 3 with an aortic aneurysm. Traditional approaches had a near-zero chance of success given her unique anatomy. I attempted an experimental technique that offered her only hope of survival. The boardroom was silent as I continued. "The patient died on the table despite every effort to save her. I have carried that loss with me every day since." I opened my own folder and slid documents across the table. What Curtis hasn't shared is the rest of the story. 6 months after that surgery, the technique I pioneered was refined and published in the Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery. It has since saved over 12,000 lives worldwide. The board members glanced at the medical journal articles I'd provided, the statistics on survival rates, the follow-up studies. I made a judgment call that day, knowing the risks. I've never hidden from that responsibility, but I won't be threatened with it now as a way to protect Curtis's ego and control. I turned to face my husband directly. Release whatever documents you want, Curtis. My record as a surgeon, the lives saved, the techniques developed, the surgeons trained, stands on its own. Curtis's expression hardened. This isn't just about the malpractice case, Vivian. I have other information, personal matters that would embarrass us both if made public. You mean your affair with Natasha? Or perhaps your systematic financial exploitation of your stroke survivor wife? Those are already public thanks to the court hearing. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Curtis's face. He hadn't expected me to call his bluff. Rebecca cleared her throat, drawing all eyes to her. As CFO, I need to inform the board that our financial position has become precarious. Several key investors have expressed concerns following recent publicity about leadership disputes. The global gastronomy offer represents our best option for ensuring the company's survival and protecting shareholder value. Curtis slammed his hand on the table. This is my company. I built it from nothing. Our company, I corrected quietly. Built with my family's recipes, my initial capital, and supported by my surgical income while you established yourself. I slid another document across the table. A financial analysis Raymond had prepared showing exactly how much of my surgical earnings had been funneled into the restaurants during their first critical decade. Without Dr. Steele's contribution, Raymond explained from where he sat beside Martin, Steele Fine Dining would never have survived its early years. By my calculation, her financial input represented 68% of operating capital during the first 10 years. The board members exchanged glances, the narrative they'd accepted for decades beginning to crumble. Furthermore, I added, the original partnership agreement giving me 51% ownership was never legally superseded. Curtis has operated for years as though his subsequent corporate restructuring changed that fact. It did not. Curtis's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in his ear, his expression grave. Curtis shook his head sharply in response. We've prepared a comprehensive proposal for the board's review, Rebecca continued smoothly, distributing new folders. The global gastronomy acquisition at the originally negotiated price, with guaranteed positions for key staff and management who wish to stay on. And what about me? Curtis demanded. Am I expected to simply walk away from my life's work? You'll receive exactly what the agreement entitles you to, 49% of the proceeds. I met his gaze steadily, which is still a substantial sum. For 3 hours, the board deliberated, asked questions, and reviewed documents. Curtis alternated between charm and intimidation, trying to sway the members who had been loyal to him for so long. But the financial realities Rebecca presented were irrefutable, and the legal position Judith outlined was solid. By early afternoon, the vote was called, 6-3 in favor of approving the sale to Global Gastronomy under the terms Rebecca and I had negotiated. Curtis sat perfectly still as the result was announced, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, he gathered his papers, stood, and walked out without a word. He'll try something else, Martin warned as we left the boardroom. Let him, I replied. We're prepared now. The sale proceeded with remarkable speed after that. Diana Corey's team moved efficiently, clearly eager to complete the transaction before anything else could derail it. Within 2 weeks, contracts were signed, funds transferred, and Steele Fine Dining officially became part of Global Gastronomy's portfolio. My share of the proceeds, significantly larger than Curtis had anticipated when he began planning the sale, was immediately transferred to a new account Curtis couldn't access. His portion went to an escrow account pending resolution of financial irregularities Raymond had identified during his forensic examination of the books. Curtis filed suit, of course, challenging the sale on multiple grounds. But with the transaction complete and Global Gastronomy's considerable legal resources now aligned with our interests, his chances of prevailing were slim. I didn't see Curtis during those weeks. He'd moved into a downtown hotel, communicating only through his lawyers. Natasha had disappeared entirely, back to wherever she'd come from once her usefulness to Curtis had ended. The day the sale finalized, Rebecca joined me for dinner at home, the first time we'd had a moment to simply be mother and daughter since this ordeal began. What will you do now? She asked, as we sat in the garden, watching the summer twilight deepen around us. I considered the question. At 71, with more money than I could spend in my remaining years, what did I want? I've been offered a position consulting on Global Gastronomy's charitable foundation, I said, using restaurants to address food insecurity. Rebecca nodded approvingly. And Dad? That's for him to decide. The divorce papers have been filed. Once the financial settlement is complete, we'll have no reason for further contact. He's lost everything that mattered to him, Rebecca observed, not without compassion. The restaurants were his identity, as surgery was mine. The difference is, I never tried to take his identity from him. He was willing to destroy mine. Later that evening, alone in the house that would soon be sold as part of the divorce settlement, I found myself in Curtis's former office. It still held the awards, the magazine covers, the photos with celebrities, the carefully curated evidence of a successful life. On impulse, I opened the desk drawer where I'd found the operating agreement so many weeks ago. Among Curtis's papers was a small velvet box I recognized, the one that had held my engagement ring 50 years earlier. Inside was a tarnished silver locket I hadn't seen in decades. The inscription inside read simply, "To V, all my dreams begin with you. C." For a moment, I felt the weight of all we had lost, not just in these recent months, but over the slow erosion of decades. The young surgeon and ambitious chef who had once believed they could conquer the world together had disappeared so gradually that I hardly remembered when we'd lost ourselves. I closed the locket and returned it to the drawer. That chapter was finished. 1 month after the sale, I purchased a new home, a sleek, modern apartment overlooking the river, filled with light and lacking any trace of the life I'd shared with Curtis. Martin helped me move in. Rebecca organized my new kitchen, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly at peace. The stroke that Curtis had seen as an opportunity had become, ironically, my liberation. It had forced me to confront not just his betrayal, but my own complicity in decades of surrender, small compromises that had accumulated until I barely recognized myself. My work with Global Gastronomy's foundation gave me purpose, channeling my organizational skills and precision into new ventures. Diana Curie proved to be a formidable ally, her business acumen matched by genuine social concern. Curtis's lawsuit eventually settled out of court. He received his share of the proceeds, diminished by penalties for the financial irregularities Raymond had documented. According to Martin, he was planning to open a small restaurant in Florida, starting over at 73. On the anniversary of my stroke, I stood on my balcony, watching the sunset reflect on the river. My body had healed as much as it ever would. The slight limp remained, and occasionally words eluded me momentarily. But my mind was clear, my purpose restored, my relationships with my children stronger than they had been in years. The phone rang, Diana calling about a new initiative for the foundation. As I answered, I caught my reflection in the window glass. I barely recognized the woman who looked back at me, not because she appeared older or different physically, but because of the unburdened strength in her eyes. Curtis had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps his greatest miscalculation was assuming that age and illness had weakened me. Instead, they had burned away everything non-essential, leaving behind only the steel at my core. The same steel that had carried me through decades in operating rooms, raising children, and building a life. He had thought he was dealing with a diminished version of the woman he'd married. Instead, he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. If you've enjoyed my story, please hit the subscribe button below. And remember to turn on notifications so you don't miss my next video, where I'll share how I rebuilt my life after losing everything. Don't forget to leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have forgiven the betrayal or fought back like I did?